It's been despicable. The Biden-Harris administration broke the railroad strike. They said to workers that you're not allowed to go on strike and advocate for your needs. That's the real core of the Democratic Party.
And really, that's the first red line they crossed.
And the Democratic Party, including Vice President Harris, that we've now endorsed, is continuing to send the military aid to Israel, and that is something that we cannot accept as UAW workers and the working class in general. We should reject putting our endorsement in a person who has been complicit in this genocide, who has been aiding and abetting this genocide.
Welcome to On Strike, a production of Workers Strike Back. I'm Kshama Sawant. As the 2024 election season begins to draw to a close, Workers Strike Back members are campaigning to get out the vote for Jill Stein, the strongest anti-war, pro-worker candidate in this election. We say no votes for genocide, no votes for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, the two candidates of the anti-worker, anti-union, warmongering parties of U.S. capitalism. We have members from Seattle, Boston, and Kansas City currently helping to get out the vote in Michigan for Jill Stein. As our regular viewers will know, Workers Strike Back has also been helping workers organize in their unions for ceasefire resolutions and specifically for resolutions to rescind their endorsements for Kamala Harris and before that, Joe Biden. Today's episode is about the efforts of Workers Strike Back members to organize for such resolutions in their unions. We're joined by Justin Smeltzer and Joe Sugrue. Justin is an electrical worker at a Caterpillar plant in Peoria, Illinois. He's also a rank-and-file member of the United Auto Workers, or UAW, Union Local 974. Joe is a music teacher in the Seattle area, a former rank-and-file member of the North Shore Education Association, and a former guest on this show. Joe is, as some of you may know, also part of the music team that composed the theme music for On Strike. Both Justin and Joe are my fellow members of Workers Strike Back and also my fellow members of Revolutionary Workers, a nationwide organization of revolutionary socialists. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. If you have watched On Strike before, you know that we bring coverage, political analysis, and strategy for the working class of the kind you simply won't find in the mainstream media. Become a member of Workers Strike Back to help ensure we can continue to build our movement against the billionaires and their political servants, and so that On Strike can continue to bring the kind of discussions about strategy needed to fight back and win. We don't run any ads, we don't accept any corporate money, and we rely entirely on donations from working people.
I'm a new member of Workers Strike Back. What motivated me is that we have a presidential election. I don't think it's sufficient to just abstain and to not have a plan. I think voting for Jill Stein is a very concrete thing that can move us forward. I also think it has to be our mission to break from the two-party system. We need a party that's for the workers and the oppressed. And I do believe that this is a good concrete step in that direction.
Go to workersstrikeback.org and click on Become a Member. Also, make sure you tune into On Strike's election night coverage on Tuesday, November 5th, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll be offering live analysis from here in Seattle and on the ground in Michigan, the most important battleground for the anti-war movement right now. We're fighting for the biggest possible vote for Jill Stein as the strongest anti-war candidate and to deliver a defeat for Kamala Harris on the basis of her arming and funding genocide. We'll discuss the next steps for our movements and towards building a new anti-war party of, by, and for working people. Regardless of the outcome, it will be crucial that we harness the momentum from this campaign. That's why Workers Strike Back is organizing a conference in Seattle, February 22nd, starting at 10 a.m. Pacific, to discuss the way forward in fighting the two parties of the warmongering billionaire class and building a working class anti-war movement. Register now at workersstrikeback.org/events. Welcome to On Strike, Justin and Joe.
Thanks for having me, Shama.
Thanks for having me also.
So great to have you both here. Justin, can you first tell us why you thought it was important to bring forward a resolution in your union to rescind the UAW endorsement for Kamala Harris for president?
Yeah, I thought this was an important statement to make because of two major reasons. One of those reasons being that labor unions are at their core supposed to be fighting against corporate greed and uniting the working class together to fight against the corporations that are exploiting them. And I find that the Democratic Party, in this election and all elections previous, they really don't have a plan for the working class. And unfortunately, the labor leaders and people involved in the unions continue to think that that's their left outlet when they're really not giving them any sort of minimum wage increase or anything to help strengthen unions in this country, and many other issues. And the other thing is that for the people of Gaza, they are undergoing the genocide right now, and the UAW, my union, has called for a ceasefire, and uh, that request is not being listened to by the Democrats who are currently in power, and the Biden and Harris administration. They will not give us an arms embargo that members of plenty of different locals all over UAW have been putting forward ceasefire resolutions and asking for this arms embargo. And the Democratic Party, including Vice President Harris, that we've now endorsed, is continuing to send the military aid to Israel, and that is something that we cannot accept as UAW workers and the working class in general. We should reject uh, putting our endorsement in a person who has been complicit in this genocide, who has been aiding and abetting this genocide, and we need to break from the Democratic Party and tell them that you will not get our vote if you're not listening to the workers' demands, to the demands of UAW. We should put forward things that we need from them in whatever election cycle, and if they cannot hold true to any of those demands or comply with anything that we request from them, we reserve the right to withhold our endorsement, withhold our votes, and we should really be democratically voting upon who is being endorsed in our unions rather than the labor leadership making that decision for us.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that final point because I was about to ask you, by the way, were you and other rank and file members of UAW, including your coworkers, were you ever consulted about this endorsement by the UAW endorsement of Kamala Harris?
No, I was not.
Me
Right.
neither.
Yes, you weren't either, exactly. And I think this is what we've seen as a widespread phenomenon in the labor movement under pressure from rank and file union members like yourselves and from the working class as a whole, which is the majority of which, and this is a historic achievement, a historic phenomenon, that a majority of the American working class is completely opposed to the war, which is now genocide in Gaza. Yep. They, the majority of the American working class is demanding that there be a complete stop to arms to Israel. In fact, embargo is even it's not even as strong of a demand in the sense that it is embargo is a temporary stoppage. Even that has not happened. Right. There's not been a hair's difference in the pro-war, pro-genocide policy of the Biden-Harris administration. And you see labor leadership actually, they're under pressure from the working class. They're forced to pass these ceasefire resolutions, but then they turn around and endorse Kamala Harris without any discussion with the membership. And in fact, before Kamala Harris became the Democratic nominee, it was Joe Biden. And Joe, and you say share the same name, but I don't think there's anything else in common between you and Biden. You brought forward a resolution to rescind the Joe Biden endorsement in Right. your union in the Washington Education Association. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. Last April, myself and other Workers Strike Back members put forward a resolution very similar to what you had done, Justin, where we were saying that it was completely contradictory for the NEA, the National Education Association, to demand a ceasefire along with dozens, tens of other unions, but then also endorse Joe Biden. And it's just, to me, that is a calling for a ceasefire in the abstract. It doesn't mean anything if we're actually, if not we, but the US government, the Biden-Harris administration is continuing to fund this genocide in Gaza, this genocidal war.
And it's really like double speak, right?
Yeah.
So under pressure from workers, the leadership passes a ceasefire resolution, but then to actually make a ceasefire happen, what needs to happen? The union movement needs to send a powerful message to the Democratic Party, which, as Justin said, is the party that is in power right now. And it is the party that is overseeing this genocide.
Yeah, absolutely. They are sending tens of billions of dollars to oversee this genocide and to, unfortunately, help carry it out. And I think that increasingly workers, union members are completely fed up with that. When we put forward this resolution, there were lots of people at this Washington Education Association conference and people in our workplaces who we were talking to on the ground that were really supportive of this idea and just excited to have these conversations and excited that people were bringing this forward.
And obviously, genocide, as we have said in Worker Strike Back, is a particular red line that we cannot cross as the working class. An injury to one is an injury to all. And in fact, it is a historic duty, political and moral duty for the labor movement to stand against this genocide of Palestinian people. And we need the labor movement internationally to help lead the international anti-war movement. But we also know that the Democratic Party has been far from an advocate of workers' needs in general. Can you both talk about that, maybe starting with you, Joe? Like, what as a rank and file union member, what do you see as the role of the Democrats towards the working class of America?
It's been despicable. The Biden-Harris administration broke the railroad strike. They said to workers that you're not allowed to go on strike and advocate for your needs. That's the real core of the Democratic Party.
And really, that's the first red line they crossed, breaking a strike.
I don't know how we as, for me as a socialist, but even just for people who might not consider themselves socialists, but want to advocate for workers' rights and the ability for workers to fight for themselves, I absolutely agree. That's a red line. Also, Biden-Harris administration promised a $15 minimum wage. Didn't do that. They absolutely do not stand for Medicare for all, basic human rights. They
also promised canceling student debt.
Me and so many other people are riddled with student debt, and they haven't done anything meaningful for that. It's just an extremely confusing anti-worker process. I could go on and on. I mean, I've talked about this on the show as well, but the Democratic Party has completely failed to tax the rich, even remotely, to fund public education or public transportation.
And Justin, did you want to add anything to this?
I mean, even further back from the, Democratic Party, we see Obama bailing out Wall Street. We see NAFTA with Bill Clinton, and that destroys the U.S. manufacturing, economy based around that, and all kinds of things. I mean, the endless wars that they carry out. I mean, we got Vietnam and the Middle East. They didn't invade Iraq, but they continued Iraq, and they went into Afghanistan and continued the war economy, manufacturing more weapons and sending more troops at the time and military aid to other places. I don't think the Democrats are our friends. They're not the friends of the working class of other countries. And I think we, as the working class, need to be in solidarity with all workers, not just people here in America. So I think it's important to stand up for those people that, are being destroyed in other countries by, the interests of the Democratic Party. And that interest is not us as the workers.
And also, I think we have a particular interest in that because as the working class in the United States, we are part of a country that is, like we were saying earlier, facilitating this genocide, giving tens of billions of dollars so that the Israeli state can continue this. And so we have a particular interest, not a particular interest, but a responsibility as workers in the United States to say that we're not going to have any more of this and we're going to withhold our endorsements from these candidates.
And ultimately, and we're about to talk about this later in the show, it is a situation where neither the Republican nor the Democratic Party represents workers. And the historical trajectory that Justin was talking about, the various wars, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam, the various attacks on workers internationally, including the NAFTA, which happened under Bill Clinton, the fact that Barack Obama, a Democrat, bailed out the big banks and the same Wall Street billionaires who caused the Great Recession in the first place. And you see the similar policies from the Republican Party. In fact, the Republican Party does not even have the progressive rhetoric that the Democratic Party sometimes uses, but ultimately they are both servants of the billionaire class, and they both represent the interests of US capitalism. And we have a real opportunity to talk to Justin about the Trump and the working class in many of the other states and outside Washington State, and we're going to take that opportunity in a second. But Justin, going back to the resolution that you brought forward in your UAW local to rescind UAW's Kamala Harris endorsement, can you tell us what happened when you took this to your union, and what was the response of the leadership, labor leadership?
Yeah, so when I first tried to bring this resolution forward, or at least find out how to do that, through speaking to my labor leadership, my local labor leaders, including my president, the main person I talked to, they didn't want to really help me figure out how to do it. They made it difficult for me. They wanted me to jump through all different types of doing, the research myself and trying to figure it out because they didn't want me to put forward a resolution. Then when I found out some things leading me to believe that maybe I knew how to do it, then they told me, no, we're not going to let you do it. And you're not allowed to speak about it. You're not allowed to have people vote on it because you're not an elected representative of your grievance division. Because I guess the way my union works, and I'm sure others, is that with a certain amount of the members are elected to be representatives at a council meeting, whereas me as a regular rank and file member does not have a voice at all of the meetings. I can't change anything legislation wise or tell the union what I think they should do and have other members vote on it. This has to be done through somebody else. And so I then went to speak to my representative who's supposed to be representing my local grievance division and ask them to put forward the resolution for me. They did agree to do it. And then upon trying to put the resolution forward at the meeting, he was confronted by some of the executive board members at the local, and these labor leaders seemed to deter him from carrying out his agreement, and he no longer wanted to help me push it forward. They allowed me to speak at the union meeting on the resolution, and him as well. But I mean, they're trying to say that there's some form of democracy in the local by saying, oh, well, we'll let everyone have a free voice over whatever they want to talk about. But if there's no way to vote on it, how is that democratic? So, I mean, I really wanted to see if there was other members who would be interested in this. And because it's not a full membership meeting and most people don't go to it anyways because they've already come into contact with this sort of bureaucratic system, people don't come out, and the people that are there, they just kind of do whatever they're told by the labor leadership. And so that seemed to be my response that I got at the meeting.
I really appreciate you sharing the details of what that actually looked like. I mean, the labyrinthine and bureaucratic system that you had to wade through. And also, what you noticed one is the complete lack of democracy, and just how one way in which the lack of democracy shows up is how opaque the whole process is. And then also the other very important observation you made, Justin, and I want to have you weigh in on this as well, Joe, in a second, but the fact that the meetings, the union meetings themselves are set up in such a way that most workers who would actually be excited about using the union as a way to fight back against the bosses, to build something, to build a militant rank and file organized effort, they actually don't show up to those meetings because they know, as you said, Justin, they already have seen it, they've experienced what you experienced, and they don't feel it is worth showing up, even though it's actually organizing in your union is part of the backbone of what we need to do.
Right. And the irony of that also is a lot of times these union leaders will talk about how they need quorum to, vote on certain things in meetings, but they don't talk about anything really meaningful for their own workers to encourage them to come to those meetings.
Right.
And I've experienced that. I've experienced so much of what you're talking about, Justin. I think it was incredibly courageous for you to continue pushing forward and going through those barriers and figuring out how you can, at the very least, make your point in the union hall and make your point in front of your coworkers. And I also think it's politically important.
Absolutely.
We'll only figure out how to do this if we try.
Yes, I really agree with you, Joe, that this is very courageous of Justin to do that. And it's so important that Justin is speaking about this at On Strike, because I know that there's going to be a lot of workers out there who are going to hear this story and feel inspired. Joe, can you tell us a little bit also about what happened at the Washington Education Association conference where you brought the Rescind Joe Biden endorsement resolution? How did the labor leadership react there?
Yeah. Even before the conference itself, the process of getting forward a resolution, a political resolution, something that said our union should take a stand against the genocide or our union should rescind its endorsement of Biden, even just putting those ideas forward, you're put up with bureaucratic barriers. And so specifically, I had to go through a lot of processing of emailing and arguing why things should be heard and all this kinds of stuff.
Why do you think the labor leadership, most of the labor leadership anyway, has been responding in this way, where if you're a rank and file member, you don't even know how to put forward a resolution, and they're going to set up obstacle after obstacle for you to do anything? What's at the heart of all of this?
At the heart of all of it is that these labor leaders want to uphold the system. They want to uphold the capitalist system. Exactly. And an extremely important part of the capitalist system right now is the relationship between the labor movement, organized working class people, and in this case specifically in the United States, and the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party as well to a degree with some unions, but primarily it's the relationship between the labor movement and the Democratic Party. And what I think was happening in your case, Justin, and also in my case, is that even if there are the rumblings of conversations happening amongst the working class that we should break ties with the Democratic Party and go further than that to actually build a new independent party of the working class that actually advocates for our needs, that actually fights for the labor movement, they're terrified because that is an extremely integral relationship to the system. And so the backlash that you've endured, or just the barriers, the bureaucratic stumbling blocks they put in front of you, and they've done the same with me, are all an attempt to demoralize us. They're all an attempt to confuse us, to make us feel like our politics don't matter, to make us feel like we're doing something wrong. But the opposite is actually true. We're advocating for the working class. We're actually demonstrating in action what it means to be a rank and file member who wants there to be true democracy in the union, who wants these discussions to take place.
And ultimately, it's about building that fight back. I mean, and the whole description that you presented, Joe, I would say all of that sort of comes under what I would call business unionism,
right?
Meaning the labor leadership looking at their role as trying to mediate between the bosses and the workers rather than what they need to do, which is organize the rank and file into a militant fight back. And as you correctly said, all of that they're sort of their relationship to the capitalist system itself, the way they perceive their role between bosses and workers as in sort of intermediaries rather than representatives of the working class. All of this is also integral to their relationship with the Democratic Party for the simple reason that the Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party, is a representative of the interests of capitalism. And so all of this is exactly why in Worker Strike Back and in Revolutionary Workers, we emphasize the need to build urgently a new anti-war working class party in the United States, because we see this dead end. And at the same time, as you also said, Joe, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, that it's still important for us to start building that, the beginnings of some sort of labor organizing, rank and file organizing inside the labor movement, which is why it's so important that you brought the resolution forward and then Justin did. And Justin, I want to turn to you. You talked to many of your co-workers, and it was a different kind of conversation than with the labor leadership. Can you talk about that? And specifically, can you talk about the role played by the petition that you used? Like, explain how you engaged in conversations with your coworkers. How did you open that conversation? And What is the petition that you used? I know Joe and you, as Workers' Strike Back members, worked together in developing that petition. What did that petition say, and what were the conversations like?
Yeah, the petition was basically me approaching members of the union that are there working at Caterpillar, and uh, I would approach them during lunch hour or something and go talk to them and show them the petition and advocate for the resolution that we were putting forward to rescind Harris's endorsement. And the petition said that we need to break from the two parties of war and capitalism and end the genocidal war on Gaza. I got, especially with the people I work with every day, a significantly better response. I did have some negative interactions with some coworkers, but for the people that I work the most closely with, in my particular building at Caterpillar, I ran into a lot of people who were receptive to the idea of at least wanting to end the war. I have a lot of people that I talk to that are Trump supporters, and they do want to continue supporting Trump, even though I told them that he wants to continue the war. And some of them try to tell me, well, no, he said in whatever interview he wants to, we shouldn't have so many people be dying. And that's not true, obviously. And I have other members that I run into that are more on the liberal end that are telling me Harris is the lesser evil. But I did have some conservative people as well tell me that they think that Trump is the lesser evil. And I run into actually more people than I would have ever thought, bringing this petition around to people, and they'd say, yeah, I want the war in Gaza to end, but I think that I don't want Kamala so bad that I have to vote for Trump because a third party option is not going to work right now. I need to vote for someone who can win, and that's Trump. And so I'm voting for Trump for that reason, because I don't want Kamala. I also got that from one person. Really, in my area, there was only one person who had that same argument the other way, saying that they think that Kamala is the lesser evil. But this was someone who I actually convinced to come to the meeting, my labor rep, and he wanted to speak about the war and ending the war during the council meeting. So I don't know if he has changed his mind on voting for Kamala or not, but at least it's got that conversation started. And I talked to him about how the Green Party and Jill Stein is an option, and that we're never going to get anywhere if we continue to keep going to the right. It's never going to benefit labor in any way if the person running for president doesn't have a labor agenda, does not have a union agenda, does not have a working class agenda. We should not be endorsing them. It's just as simple as that, and we should be voting on it. And I would think most people would recognize, if they heard other members speak, hey, this person has a working class agenda and this person doesn't, they would recognize, okay, well, this one sounds a heck of a lot better than that one. I think this is who we should endorse. But unfortunately, people just don't even know that the war is happening or that there are third party options, and they think they have to vote for one of these two horrible warmongering candidates. And I think it's been beneficial, if nothing else, to at least tell some of these people that there are options and to inform people on the war. But I have gotten at least a couple reactions good enough to have someone like read through the resolution in its entirety right in front of me and turn to me and say, absolutely, what can we do? Like, how can we get this done? I want this rescinded. I want this war ended. So I have had some positive reactions like that as well. It's been definitely different from the labor leadership trying to say, no, you shouldn't do this. Nobody told me that. Nobody said that I shouldn't have my ability to have this resolution heard. Most people were supportive and at least wanting to end the war, if nothing else.
Right, and they clearly, your fellow rank and file clearly did not question your democratic right to put forward a resolution, even if they might have disagreed with the content of the resolution, which is very, very important.
And it's actually a lot different than the approach of the labor leaders.
Oh, completely,
who
yeah.
didn't want you to put it forward at all.
No, and in fact, they specifically disagree with the content of the
Right.
resolution, and so they use all kinds of other maneuvers,
Right.
anti-democratic maneuvers, to keep that from going forward, because they actually fear that such a resolution would get agreement.
Right.
And also, they want to prevent the discussion. I mean, Justin, what you shared just now was very useful, because it's the process of having frank conversations with your coworkers where the starting point might not be agreement. However, having a genuine political debate about, well, what is the way forward, whether you're talking about ending the genocide or about how workers in America, in the richest country in the world, have been betrayed year after year. While the billionaires get richer, ever richer, we are continuing to suffer, and actually our living standards are plummeting because of the insane cost of living. So all of this requires workers, rank and file workers, to talk to one another. I wonder, Justin, if you could share one more thing with us in terms of your conversations with your fellow workers. First of all, it's very important what you brought forward. I mean, we're here in Seattle, and often for many people who, especially who are now saying, well, I understand you're against a genocide, but you need to vote for Kamala Harris, in the blue bubble, so to say, forget that there is this entire America out there where there are real workers who have different opinions. And you're in Illinois, this is part of the Rust Belt. You have encountered both, as you, I think, very eloquently described, where workers, voting for Kamala Harris because they think she's the lesser evil, but then you have workers who are voting for Trump because they think he's the lesser evil.
Yep.
And in reality, they're not excited about either. And then you also talked about, when Justin, you and I talked, you also talked about how there is a feeling of apathy and a feeling of disconnection from politics among workers because they think nothing's working. How are you responding to that feeling, and what are the arguments you make to your fellow workers to convince them that they should get involved in Worker Strike Back?
Well, first of all, this is kind of easy for me to connect to them on that level of feeling that apathy, because that's me. That has been me for the longest time. I have not engaged in politics. I've never even voted before. And I have had no interest in engaging with either of these two horrible choices that are put in front of me for my entire adult life. So, I think that people just need to know that there's other options out there. And I have had a lot of workers that I have been talking to that feel that they're not going to vote, and they say they don't want to vote. In fact, I have a lot of friends in my area that are the same way. I think a large majority of people in these like areas in the Rust Belt, like you're saying, they don't feel like there's any person looking out for their interests. They don't see Republicans or Democrats caring about anything that will affect them in any way. And most of them to the point where they don't even care about who's locally elected, let alone presidentially. So the conversations I have with these people are just like, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I have felt that for the longest time, but there are options out there. Jill Stein is running, and she's running on a anti-war platform. We can end the wars. There is a way to change the discussion about things like migration, and we don't always have to scapegoat certain groups of people. That doesn't need to be the narrative for both of the parties. Like, there's someone out there who has a different agenda on these topics, and we don't have to continue to just go down this right-wing maze that these two parties are laying out for us. There is a movement building. There's people involved, and we need to build power in our labor unions first. And that's why I'm doing this, and most people are receptive to, okay, yeah, I'll support you if that's what you're doing. I don't know how many of those people are going to come out to vote. Um, I'm trying to keep those discussions up with people in my workplace, since the election's coming close. But it's a relatively familiar discussion for me because I'm very familiar with that way of thinking.
Yeah.
Right. So, Joe, Justin just made a very important point about how the vote for the anti-war movement for Jill Stein, the strongest anti-war candidate, is not an end in itself, but that it's connected to movement building, as he said. Can you talk about what is Worker Strike Back strategy for this type of movement building, and how is it? How are we planning to use the vote for Jill Stein, and why we're fighting for every possible vote as a platform to build something in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that we need to fight for every single vote, like you said, for Jill Stein. And if that delivers a defeat to Kamala Harris, then that's the outcome of that.
And we working people should claim the victory.
Yeah, I think so. If we are realistically trying to build an independent party of the working class, which I think we all agree we need. A lot of what you were saying too, Justin, about workers choosing Trump as the lesser evil, all of these sorts of things, they all point to the fact that if the labor movement and if workers in general don't begin breaking from the Democratic Party, people are either going to continue to be pushed to the right, or they're just going to become even more apathetic to what's going on when they really do want to have better lives and fight for things. They're just not given avenues to do that. And so I think we need to be fighting for every vote possible for Jill Stein. I do not think Jill Stein's going to win the election, but if we are realistic about building a new independent party of the working class, we have to start showing that there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people that are saying enough is enough with the Republican Party, enough is enough with the Democratic Party, we need something different. And I think that showing that in our vote for an anti-war, pro-worker candidate, and then connecting that, really importantly, connecting that to the conference that you had brought up at the beginning of the episode is crucial. We want as many
the conference in February.
Yeah, the conference in February in Seattle, which I'm assuming there will also be a live stream option for people to tune in everywhere.
Yeah, but we hope everybody will come here in person who can.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, please come here to just continue these discussions and that crucial discussion of how do we create that new independent party of the working class? And right now, I think voting for Jill Stein with the mindset of connecting it to that party, connecting it to that conference, connecting it to further organizing is the best way we can do that.
I totally agree. And including what we need is strike actions in the workplace to shut down the profit machine of the capitalist class, which has historically been one of the crucial components of forcing any kind of significant change.
Yeah, I mean, that independent party of the working class we're talking about, independent meaning no corporate influence, no corporate money whatsoever. If we don't have that influence from the corporations, then we can actually abide by what we've talked about before as class struggle unionism, where we see our interests as workers opposed to the interests of the billionaires, opposed to the interests of the bosses. There's no confusing that in this new party, whereas the Democratic Party truly is a party of the billionaires and the bosses, and then they just pretend to be the party of the workers and get enough votes to win. Occasionally pretend, right. They're not even that good at it anymore, but they just say we're not Trump, so a lot of people will still vote for them.
Right.
But yeah, we absolutely need to connect this to the conference.
Right. And Justin, going back to one of the points you made about how you yourself felt that apathy, talk about how that linked up with your joining Worker Strike Back and what your experience has been as a member of Worker Strike Back.
Yeah, so I guess as long as I can remember, I have felt that like the system doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for anyone I see. It's a broken system under capitalism, and it's pretty much beyond reform. At a certain point, upon discovering this, I'm seeing all the different different types of people being exploited, all the different ways that the world does not work for the working class, and the wars that are happening, and just all the tragedies of life. And that caused me to not want to learn about that and not want to know about it. And I tried to turn away from it for as long as I possibly could, which is not the correct approach. And once I had children a few years back, um, having children kind of forced me into opening my eyes again to the world around me and saying, okay, like I need to provide for this child. I need to get a job. And so like being in the labor force, a unionized job, like a better paying job, that kind of made me realize like, okay, yeah, like there's things to fight for here. And then I learned more about how the world works via growing up through having to grow up from having kids. And now that I have two of them, and ever since I had my first one, I'm look at my son who has disabilities, and I just been thinking, his whole life about how am I going to pay for his medical bills, and how am I going to, like, I spend so much time in the hospital, I spend so much time in therapy offices that I just couldn't any longer, like, live in this current system. And I need to physically do something to help him other than just being his parent, because he's going to grow up one day and he's going to have to live in this planet. And if we leave it a mess, uh that's he's going to look at me and say, what, why didn't you do anything? So it's because I care about my family, but I have it, and they open my eyes to this. But really, I have a deep care for all people, and it's important to me that, like, all of these tragedies of life that I've been talking about, like, that I had to turn away from, those things are all important to me too. And uh, because I was forced to open my eyes back up again and really take in the world in its entirety, at this point, I noticed that I have to do something about it. And looking for that avenue, I believe that Workers Strike Back has a real strategy to do that. And so why I joined Workers Strike Back is because I think that they have the right method, the right strategy, the right planning, the right organizational skills to actually bring about revolutionary change and change the way that the world operates. And so that we're no longer being destroyed by the capitalist system that just continues to create more wars, not give us health care, and destroy all the social safety nets and structures of every person's everyday life. And this isn't, it's not just about me, it's about every single person out there and every underclassed person that I feel that we need to fight for. And I needed to get myself involved in something that could be an actual vehicle for change in any meaningful way. And I think Workers Strike Back is a amazing vehicle to do that.
Thank you so much, Justin, for sharing that personal story, which I think is going to speak to a lot of working and young people
Yep.
across America, because these are just such difficult circumstances that people live in, and especially talking about the suffering of children,
Yep.
I think is really, really a crucial aspect of why people like ourselves, I think, draw political conclusions that the capitalist system doesn't work. And in fact, Justin, you talked about, it was going to be my next question, but you already answered it, which is, you're a member of Revolutionary Workers as well as Workers Strike Back, because you're also a revolutionary socialist. And Joe, you are as well. I am as well. Can you close out the discussion by explaining why you're a revolutionary socialist, why capitalism can't work for working people, and Justin touched on that as well. And most importantly for this moment, why are socialist ideas crucial to rebuilding a fighting labor movement?
I think that, like you mentioned, and thank you, Justin, again, for sharing all of that. I also think that those are the realities of being a working person in the world under capitalism. And so it was just really appreciated for you to share that story and what's kind of reawakened your will to really fight for a better world for your children, for your family, for all working people internationally. I think you put it really well, but just to say again, capitalism does not put the interests of working people, does not put the interests of ordinary people in mind at all. It's all about profit. And that profit only goes to an extremely small group of people who are already at the top of society. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for working people. It's not sustainable for 99.9999 whatever percent of people in the world. It's not sustainable for the planet. I myself am a huge lover of nature and all things animals and birds and all these things. And
you're an avid bird watcher.
Yeah, I'm a birder. And yeah, I also don't see capitalism ever getting us out of environmental destruction. In fact, it is just plunging us deeper and deeper into it. And so we need a socialist society instead that is actually democratically owned and controlled by the working class so we can make smart decisions. Capitalism it's not even informed by science, the decisions that these billionaires make. It's just informed by profit. And So
in fact, the trajectory that the capitalist system and the capitalist class is using, as for example, taking climate change as the example,
Right.
it's actually deeply unscientific because they are careening towards climate catastrophe.
Yeah, it's terrifying, and all of that is related to the human experience as well. There's just such a relationship between all of this. To answer that second question about why socialist ideas are necessary to the labor movement, I think for one, as socialists, we see that the working class is the one that actually makes society run. It's the group of people that actually make things, that provide services.
And the pandemic really revealed that, right?
Absolutely.
Who's actually essential to society.
Exactly. They were willing to call us essential workers for a moment, but now we are apparently no longer essential. But the reality is, as socialists, we know, because of that, we know that if workers withhold their labor, it can shut the whole system down. And that's when we have power to really advocate for ourselves and fight for the needs of working people on the planet. And so that is one really important idea to always keep in mind while we are organizing. And I think it informs the strategies that we use. It also informs the fact that we know the interests of the working class and the bosses are opposed. And again, that relates to the business unionist idea. We can't think that as union members, we're going to come to the table with the bosses and come out with an agreement that all sides are happy. We need to fight for agreements where the bosses are not happy, because that means we've won more and that's what we deserve. We're the ones making the stuff. One last point is that socialists see the labor movement connected to politics. And I think that's really important, because sometimes people with different motives try and divorce the two and say, let's keep politics out of the workplace, or let's keep politics even out of the labor movement. But, the Democratic Party and the leaders of the labor movement, they're okay with the relationship they have. In fact, it's a deep, deep relationship bound by millions and hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's a very important point.
Yeah. And so, thank you. And so, as socialists, we see that the labor movement and politics are interconnected inevitably. What the experience of workers and the experience of parties that govern our system, this is a relationship that we can't ignore. And instead, we have to be clear-sighted about that and talk about how we need to change it. And right now, that's with breaking from both of these parties. Another thing that we talked about at the WEA convention was that if the labor movement didn't break its relationship with the Democratic Party, that the war in the Middle East could escalate further, and likely would. And unfortunately, that's what's happened. And this was mentioned in the beginning, and Justin, you mentioned this as well, that the war has unfortunately moved even further than just Gaza and those borders, but now into Lebanon as well. And we can't stand for that. I don't think working people want a wider proliferation of war, so we need to break that relationship with the Democrats who want that war. I think as socialists also, we have to be the memory of the working class, and that includes the memory of working class fight back and strategies that are used in the labor movement, the memory of how movements have actually won things for the working class. Victories for us have not come from the kindness of Democratic Party or Republican Party politicians, but because as workers, we've forced those victories. And so socialists study those things. We study what strategies have worked, what works in the labor movement, what works internationally, and what doesn't work. We also study who our enemies are, and we know that's the billionaires. We know it's the Democratic Party as well. And this was proven, I think, with the 10 years that, you served as a city council member in Seattle, and I was a part of. I know people watching were part of those movements. We were crystal clear with our socialist analysis of how workers can fight and win. And
who's on our side
and who is on our side. Totally, yep. And we were able to win gains that impacted politics nationally, I would even say internationally.
Yes.
Actually, they absolutely did impact things internationally, in some cases very directly, like with the caste ordinance victory. So we are using Workers' Strike Back as a way to carry forward those successful strategies and broaden out the amount of people who are involved in that.
Right.
And I think just Justin's experience, thanks again for having the courage to just keep moving forward with that, because the conversations that you had with your coworkers also, even if you didn't get to vote in this moment, those conversations are the beginnings of really organizing an independent rank and file force in your union. And we can take that as members of Workers' Strike Back and talk to more people about that, get them involved also. And it's just an incredible example.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Justin. This was a really important conversation. I think it's safe to say that Almost nowhere else will working people find a conversation like this with rank and file union members who are going up against a hostile labor leadership and then talking to their fellow rank and file members to build something like a militant fight back in their union. So I really appreciate you both joining us. I'm sure we'll see both of you again at On Strike. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me as well.
As I mentioned at the start of the program, Worker Strike Back is actively campaigning in the crucial swing state of Michigan to win every possible vote for Jill Stein. If you agree with us that building the strongest possible vote for Jill Stein is the most important priority right now for the anti-war movement and for working people, please donate at workerstrikeback.org/donate. Running a Get Out the Vote campaign takes a lot of resources. And don't forget to join us for our election night live stream on Tuesday, November 5th at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. We can't afford to let the momentum of Stein's presidential campaign end after November, but need to continue building towards our organizing conference in February to discuss next steps towards a new party for working people and the anti-war movement. And please join Workers Strike Back. Go to workerstrikeback.org and click on Become a Member. Solidarity.